So what is happiness, really? It's one of those huge questions, right? And for centuries, philosophers have had their say, but today, we're going to look at what the science says. In this explainer, we are diving deep into the hard data, from these massive economic studies all the way to the inner workings of our very own brains.
All right, let's start with the belief pretty much everyone has about happiness, that a bigger bank account automatically means you're going to be happier. It's the idea that drives so much of our lives, but is it actually true? What does the data really tell us?
To figure that out, economists have spent years digging through enormous piles of data on something they call subjective well-being, which, is really just a fancy scientific way of saying how happy people report they are. And what they found? Well, it's a lot more complicated than you might think.
Okay, so here's one of the first and maybe biggest takeaways from all that data. Our happiness isn't just about the number on our paycheck. Not at all. Study after study shows that our sense of well-being is hugely, and I mean hugely, influenced by how our income stacks up against the people around us.
This gets us to two really important ideas. First, you have your absolute income. That's just the raw number, the amount of money you actually make. Simple enough. But then there's relative income. And that's all about how your money compares to your neighbors, your friends, your colleagues. And this relative income effect is the key to explaining a famous puzzle. Why an entire country can get richer and richer, but the average happiness level of its citizens just stays flat.
And there's another giant piece of the puzzle here. We adapt. You know how it is. When our income goes up, our expectations and our desires tend to go right up with it. That amazing feeling you get from a pay raise, well, it can fade pretty quickly as that new salary just becomes the new normal. And we often end up right back where we started on the happiness scale. So, okay, if endlessly chasing a bigger paycheck isn't the secret key to a happy life, then what is? Well, that same economic data actually gives us some pretty clear clues. It points to a few other key things that are super strongly connected to our sense of well-being.
Yeah, across all these different studies, these same factors just keep popping up over and over again. Things like having a job, being in good physical and mental health, having stable relationships, like a marriage, and just having strong social connections. These consistently predict higher levels of happiness.
Let's just zoom in on one of those for a second. Employment. The negative hit from being unemployed is massive. Way bigger than you'd expect just from the loss of income. On average, people who are unemployed report being anywhere from 5 to 15% less happy. And that tells you something crucial. It's not just about the money. It's about having a purpose, a routine, a social network.
Now here is a really fascinating pattern that shows up in the data. It seems our happiness isn't just a straight line. It actually tends to follow this distinct U-shape over our lives. Generally, we're happiest when we're young, then it kind of dips to its lowest point in middle age, usually somewhere between our 30s and 50s, and then it starts to climb back up again in our older years.
Okay, so we've seen the big picture view from the outside, from the economists. But how do all these life circumstances, our jobs, our relationships, actually translate into the feeling of happiness inside our heads? For that, we need to switch gears and look at what neuroscience has to say.
Going all the way back to philosophers like Aristotle, people have kind of broken down happiness into two main parts. The first part is something called hedonia, and this is the straightforward stuff. It's the experience of pleasure, enjoyment, all those positive feelings you get from a great meal, or just laughing really hard with a friend.
The second piece of the puzzle is eudaimonia. Now this one is a bit deeper, more reflective. It's not so much about that fleeting feeling of pleasure, but more about having a real sense of meaning and purpose in your life. That feeling that you're living a life that's truly worthwhile.
And this isn't just some ancient philosophical idea. Much more recently, thinkers like Sigmund Freud pointed to this same dual nature of happiness. He basically argued that our search for happiness is about two things: trying to avoid pain, and at the same time trying to experience strong feelings of pleasure.
And what's really cool is that modern neuroscience totally backs this up. When scientists look at brain scans, they see that the parts of the brain that light up when we enjoy something basic, like food, actually overlap with the circuits that get activated by more complex pleasures, like listening to a beautiful piece of music. It's like our brain has a common currency for pleasure.
So now, let's try to connect the dots. We've got the big economic data on one side, and we've got the inner workings of our brain on the other. How do we build a bridge between those two things to get a really full picture of what's going on?
Okay, remember those factors from the economic data that consistently show up as being linked to happiness. Things like having strong social connections, stable relationships, meaningful work. Well, when you look at that list through the lens of neuroscience, a really clear pattern starts to show up.
And here is the big aha moment. The reason those life factors are so powerful is because they are reliable ways to tap directly into our brain's built-in pleasure and reward systems. They consistently activate the neural circuits that give us those good feelings, that hedonic well-being we talked about.
So you can see this really clear pathway, right? An external event happens. Say you go out and socialize with friends. That event triggers a biological response inside your brain. Those pleasure and reward circuits light up. And how do we experience that brain activity? We experience it as a subjective feeling, a boost in our happiness.
Okay, let's pull all of this together. After looking at both the big data and the brain science, what is the single most important takeaway? What's the new perspective this gives us on trying to live a happy life? It's this. Happiness isn't some simple, single thing that you just find one day. It's a dynamic, ongoing process. It's this incredibly complex interplay, a constant dance between the circumstances of our lives and the ancient biological hardware that's wired into our brains.
These two different views, they don't contradict each other at all. They actually complete the picture. The big data from economics tells us what life factors are linked with happiness. The brain view from neuroscience tells us why they're linked. It explains the actual biological mechanism that turns those life factors into feelings of pleasure and meaning.
And all of this leaves us with one last, really important question. If we know this, how does it change the way we actually go about pursuing happiness? It kind of suggests that a happy life isn't about chasing some ever-receding goal, but maybe it's more about building a life that's full of activities and relationships that consistently and meaningfully light up our brain's capacity for both pleasure and purpose. So, what would a life like that look like for you?